Welcome back to Historical Secrets, where the boldest and most seductive historical stories are told in a way you've never heard before. Tonight, we will uncover the lesser known pages of the Tudor dynasty, a period where chastity was praised as sacred, yet desires, intrigues, and lusts hid just beneath the luxurious lace dresses. This is the story of women who dared to defy every rule, dared to live, love, and commit sins in their own way, shaking the entire court and leaving historians baffled to this day. If you love historical stories with a rebellious breath like this, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because we still have many buried secrets to uncover. And I want you to stay until the end of this video, because what happened to the most dangerous women of the Tudor era might make you question who truly was the depraved one in history. Sit back, turn off the lights, and let the music take you back to the 16th century, where sparkling crowns were exchanged for honor, power, and sometimes even life itself. Although Henry VIII may have rewritten doctrine to win the woman he loved, it was Anne Boleyn who rewrote the entire rulebook of the power game. In an era where women were born to remain silent, she chose to turn silence into a weapon. No one in the Tudor court, not even Henry himself, could understand what made this woman so dangerous. Not her beauty, but her defiantly sharp intelligence. In a place where every gaze was watching, Anne not only dared to challenge the king, she dared to challenge the church and the moral standards it tried to uphold. Her story was not just a misguided love affair. It was the spark that set an entire empire ablaze, a testament that just one woman saying no at the right moment could change the world. Anne did not grow up in luxury, but in knowledge. She was sent to France, where noble girls learned to speak with their eyes and command an entire room with a smile. There, Anne learned that power did not lie in the sword, but in the skill of words. When she returned to England, she was unlike any woman the court had ever seen. While other ladies regarded silence as courtesy, Anne turned silence into elegantly scornful disdain. And Henry VIII, a king who had everything, found himself unable to obtain the one thing he desired. She made him pursue, beg, and prove himself. For 7 years, the most powerful king in Europe was reduced to a lovesick man, offering the entire kingdom just for a nod. But what made Anne irresistible was not merely her refusals. It was how she made everyone believe they were witnessing something higher, bolder, more dangerous. The idea that women could also hold their own destiny. With every letter, every gift, every time Henry begged, Anne moved one step closer to the throne. Not through conspiracy, but through cold pride. When Henry separated England from Rome, he believed he was acting for love. But history shows he was merely a tool in Anne's game, a game in which she might not survive, but would certainly be remembered. Ironically, the power Anne gained was what killed her. Once crowned, she was no longer the seductive mystery Henry desired, but an uncomfortable truth he could not control. When Elizabeth was born, a baby girl instead of a prince, the king's dream collapsed. But instead of fear, Anne was proud. She did not pretend to be weak, nor did she kneel to beg for mercy. She laughed at the court's jokes, rebuked the male nobles, and asserted her intellect amid a sea of men who preferred to command rather than listen. In the 16th century, that was not the behavior of a woman. It was the sin of a rebel. Rumors spread like fire on damp straw. A powerful, beautiful, and intelligent woman was always the easiest target for those seeking to restore order. Anne was accused of adultery, incest, and even witchcraft, three familiar tools society used to bring down women who refused to be obedient. Her trial was merely a formality. The whole kingdom knew the outcome, yet no one dared speak. When stepping onto the scaffold, Anne did not weep or beg. She was calm, confident, and ultimately bowed her head with a serenity only those who have won in the hearts of others could possess. By dying, she became a legend, a symbol of ambition, intelligence, and tragedy. But the story of the Tudor court did not end with Anne. If Anne made the king break with the church, her cousin Catherine Howard was living proof of how cruel love in Tudor times could be. When Catherine entered Henry's life, the king was old, ill, and exhausted of romance. This young girl, innocent, beautiful, and impulsive, was like a beam of light in his waning afternoon. But that light brought not warmth, but fire. Henry called her his rose without a thorn, and then was wounded by the very rose. Catherine was not truly a traitor. She was simply a girl thrown into a game she did not understand. While Henry sought love, Catherine sought freedom. She wanted to live, to love, to feel, things the throne had never granted. When her secret affair with Thomas Culpeper was revealed, the court was shaken. But what stunned everyone was not the betrayal, but the stark truth that she dared to love in a world that forbade it. Catherine was executed before she turned 20, too young to understand that in Tudor England the price of passion was life itself. Between Anne, Catherine, and Mary Boleyn, Anne's sister, the Tudor dynasty emerges as a distorted mirror, reflecting both the power and frailty of humanity. Mary, in stark contrast, chose a path less tragic but no less daring: love for genuine feeling. While the court viewed marriage as a political contract, Mary married a poor soldier for love. In the Tudor world, that was the most depraved act of all. She was not beheaded nor banished from the church, she was simply forgotten. Yet perhaps that very forgetfulness was the only victory a Tudor woman could achieve. These women were not merely fallen in the eyes of history, they were symbols of defiance, of the right to love, live, and err. By the flickering candlelight of the Tudor palaces, amid heavy dresses and false prayers, they rewrote history with blood, tears, and pride. And if history calls them depraved, perhaps that is merely the past hiding its fear of the true power of a woman who dares to live authentically. Under the dim light of the Tudor palaces, a world where power, sexuality, and cunning were woven into an invisible web, women like Jane Shaw, Mary Shelton, Jane Boleyn, Bess Holland, and Anne Seymour emerged as dark angels, both seductive and dangerous, both reverent and provocative. Each possessed a unique talent to survive, endure, and even thrive in a society that regarded women merely as replaceable objects or political tools. Jane Shaw was the epitome of Tudor survival art. In a century where women were expected to remain silent and were easily replaced, she not only stood her ground but turned an entire sin into a living performance. When the church sought to humiliate her, Jane transformed penitence into an exquisite display, witnessed by all of London, leaving people powerless but to admire her skill and intelligence. She taught that in the Tudor court, a well-staged sin could outlive virtue, a lesson every powerful woman afterward had to learn. Mary Shelton, Anne Boleyn's cousin, was living proof of sophistication in the art of seduction and strategic intellect. Without needing physical intimacy, she could provoke political crises with her pen. Mary's poems, preserved in the Devonshire manuscripts, were a subtle blend of love, irony, and vulgarity. Presented under a veneer of virtue and longing, they were in fact intricate acts of flirtation. In a court where every glance and word was monitored, Mary knew how to wield her eyes, smile, and words to influence, even capturing Henry VIII's attention without violating the era's strict moral code. She was one of the rare Tudor women who could seduce without touching, insult without punishment, and survive without apology. Jane Boleyn, Lady Rowford, was a completely different type of woman. She did not actively create scandal, but always knew how to push things further and document them. Her marriage to George Boleyn, Anne Boleyn's brother, was far from happy, yet Jane used her intelligence and insight to become a living witness to the court's notorious stories. When Catherine Howard, Henry VIII's young wife, entered the power game, Jane acted as a guide, arranging, conveying information, and overseeing the Queen's every step, helping Catherine maintain power while building an intricate network of influence without direct interference. When Catherine Culpeper's scandal erupted, Jane faced immense pressure, briefly descended into madness, but ultimately held her ground long enough to witness everything, ending her life in a heroic yet deserved death that matched the reputation she had built. Bess Holland, Thomas Cromwell's mistress, exemplified how intelligence, charm, and power could coexist without title or throne. Bess knew how to manipulate those in power, softening even the most ruthless. Beneath silk and smiles, she gathered information, influenced decisions, and maintained her position without flaunting it or seizing it. When Cromwell fell, Bess quietly disappeared from the political scene, surviving and escaping the fate that many other Tudor women could not avoid. Anne Seymour, Duchess of Somerset, embodied luxury, power, and cold calculation. She married Edward Seymour, brother of Jane Seymour, Henry VIII's third wife, and held power few Tudor women could attain. Anne possessed a calm so chilling, sharpness so precise, and knew exactly how to exploit every situation to protect herself while advancing without violating the court's strict rules. Her beauty and intelligence commanded both respect and fear from anyone who encountered her. She proved that true power did not lie in the throne, but in the ability to control information, emotions, and relationships. The common thread among these Tudor women was not merely charm or beauty, but the ability to survive and influence in a world dominated by men. They knew how to wield intellect, the art of seduction, political strategy, and pride to endure and even leave their mark. They teach us that in a society filled with rigid laws and cunning enemies, intellect and subtlety could be more potent weapons than any sword or throne. Through the stories of Jane Shaw, Mary Shelton, Jane Berlin, Bess Holland, and Anne Seymour, we see a multidimensional portrait of female power in the Tudor dynasty, where intelligence, skill, and courage could surpass male authority, where a glance, a poem, or a smile could rewrite history. They were not merely depraved women in the traditional sense, but vivid, powerful figures, proving that in any era, the true strength of women commands the world's respect. If you have followed this far, you will realize that the Tudors were not just dry historical milestones, but a living world where ambition, love, desire, and intellect intersected to create extraordinary stories. These women, by living, loving, and even sinning, turned an entire dynasty into a stage of cunning, seduction, and power. They demonstrated that sometimes the most depraved thing is the ability to survive, and surviving with power, sharpness, and finesse is how history truly remembers a woman. Beneath the cold stone walls and candlelit corridors of the Tudor palaces, female power was often hidden behind layers of silk, pearls, and smiles. But women like Anne Seymour, Catherine Parr, Bessie Blount, and Frances Howard proved that in the Tudor court, intelligence, pride, and subtle strategy were far more formidable than any sword. They wielded power not through titles or thrones, but through an understanding of male psychology, relationships, and sophisticated politics. Anne Seymour, Duchess of Somerset, is a prime example. When her husband became Duke of Somerset and Lord Protector for Edward VI, Anne quickly transformed herself into the Queen without a throne, the woman who controlled every corridor of power. She donned her new status like armor and used it to command, guide, and even mock the ladies in waiting, those attempting to find their footing in court but too naive to perceive Anne's cunning. Lavish parties, magnificent homes, and having servants address her with powerful titles were not merely material symbols, they were a clear message. Anne controlled the space, controlled others, and above all, controlled information. Yet beneath the cloak of power, Anne Seymour remained grounded in reality. She understood that weakness could lead to deadly danger in the Tudor court. Thus, she wielded cold calculation as a weapon, silence as a strategy, and charm as a camouflage shield. She did not pursue traditional love scandals or intrigue, for her true ambition was power, not sex. When her husband fell from favor and was executed, Anne was imprisoned but maintained her composure and sharp intellect. The result was that her influence vanished as quickly as candle wax on a winter night. Yet Anne herself survived and retained a rare quality, power that could not be destroyed by death or the downfall of those around her. Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's sixth wife, presented a different model, skillful, wise, and clever in managing an aging, paranoid, and violent king. Catherine was not born to be queen, but she grasped the essence of Tudor power: survival, adaptability, and refined intelligence. She managed estates, cared for the king, and supported Protestant reforms, publishing theological works and even debating with Henry. This was a daring move. In Tudor times, writing books, debating religion, or voicing an opinion could lead to execution. Catherine knew how to turn intellectual power into a soft weapon, keeping Henry both intrigued and pliable, preserving her life and autonomy. After Henry's death, Catherine found freedom, remarried Thomas Seymour, a handsome but unreliable man, and maintained her wisdom, virtue, and a touch of wit. This proved that in the Tudor world, wisdom and power could exist without a crown. Bessie Blount provides another example of the delicate balance between love, power, and survival. As a maid to Queen Catherine of Aragon, Bessie caught Henry VIII's attention through her beauty, youth, and discretion. Their affair was brief but scandal-free, with no public correspondence, and notably, Bessie gave birth to Henry Fitzroy, the king's only acknowledged illegitimate son. Through this, Bessie maintained power and ensured survival for herself and her son, demonstrating that in the bloody drama of the Tudor court, subtlety and strategy were sometimes worth more than any sword. After Henry arranged a favorable marriage for Bessie with Gilbert Tailboy, she continued a peaceful life while remaining astute enough to observe the downfall of ambitious successors. Bessie did not need conventional charm. She conquered the court through survival skills and finesse in every step. Frances Howard of the powerful Howard family is the final example showing that Tudor female power could turn scandalous desire into a survival strategy. Born into a family with a history of courtly upheavals, Frances was taught that every sin could be a tool if staged carefully. When Frances sought to annul an engagement to marry Robert Carr, a royal favorite, she skillfully applied laws, strategy, and cunning to achieve her goal. Successfully annulling the engagement demonstrated her mastery of romance, law, politics, and human psychology. Even when Sir Thomas Overbury publicly criticized her, Frances employed a more sophisticated strategy, transforming anger into legal and political action, showing that in the Tudor court, survival and power often went hand in hand with cunning, masked by grace and smiles. From Anne Seymour to Frances Howard, we recognize a truth. Tudor female power did not reside in thrones or titles, but in the ability to read others, know when to stay silent, when to act, and how to turn intelligence, charm, and courage into tools of survival. These women lived in a world where every action was watched, every word could become a weapon, yet they found ways not only to endure, but to thrive. They transformed subtlety into strength, silence into authority, and intelligence into a path to survival in a bloody dynasty, where true power always came with mortal risk. And that is why, although Tudor history is famous for shocking scandals, the women who survived and influenced the court stand as living proof of intelligence, pride, and female power. They were not merely depraved in the conventional sense, but sophisticated warriors in a battle where victory was measured not by blood or thrones, but by survival, triumph, and leaving a lasting mark on history. Under the cold light of candles in the Tudor castles, women's power was often confined by thrones, marriages, and harsh laws. Yet women like Frances Howard, Margaret Douglas, Lettice Knollys, Mary, and finally Elizabeth I proved that intelligence, pride, and cunning could transcend all chains, turning them into influential figures without a throne. Frances Howard, with her survival strategies and finesse in relationships, is a prime example. When arrested and imprisoned with Robert Carr, she simultaneously denied, admitted, and insisted on her righteousness, a risky strategy that would have ended in death or obscurity for most Tudor women in similar circumstances. Yet Frances, with timely flirtation, received royal pardon, and she and Carr escaped the humiliating tower while surviving, turning a seemingly impossible failure into a small but precious victory in a politically dangerous environment. Later, Frances lived quietly, appearing in court gossip as a woman both fallen and devout, or at least that was how she wanted to be perceived. Her story shows that in a male-dominated society, the most depraved thing a woman could do was refuse to play the victim yet still survive, and Frances achieved exactly that. If Frances was a master of survival, Margaret Douglas exemplified the enduring power of royal blood. As Henry VII's granddaughter, Margaret wielded just enough influence to be significant, yet was vulnerable enough to become a target. Her life was a series of forbidden romances, each ending in imprisonment, scandal, or both. With Lord Thomas Howard, uncle of Anne Boleyn, Margaret endured a forbidden love so severe she was imprisoned in a tower. When Howard died in prison, Margaret was released with a promise not to love again, yet she fell for Charles Howard soon after and was imprisoned again. Margaret was not foolish, she was merely defiant. Knowing that love was both a weapon and a vulnerability, she wielded it skillfully for survival. Eventually, her grandson, James V, became James I of England, uniting a dynasty that had destroyed half her family. From a young woman frequently imprisoned and deprived of rights, Margaret became the grandmother of a king, a living testament that intelligence and survival instincts can transform adversity into glory. While Margaret exemplified enduring pride, Lettice Knollys symbolized charm, patience, and strategy. sharing Tudor blood and possessing the talent to make powerful men fools, Lettuce became a living nightmare for Elizabeth I. She secretly married Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, the Queen's lifelong favorite, and turned a diplomatic disaster into a story of survival. In the Tudor world, where women were often blamed for men's passions, Lettuce did not cry or whine. She retired to her estate, living like a queen without a throne. Despite facing Elizabeth's jealousy, massive debts, and Dudley's tarnished reputation, Lettuce remained composed and lived to 88, an absurdly long life in Tudor times, full of death, hatred, and violence. Lettuce's survival proves that intelligence, patience, and a bit of luck could matter more than a crown or immediate victory. Mary, Queen of Scotland, demonstrated an entirely different strategy: impulsiveness, boldness, and drama. Born to rule and raised to defy expectations, Mary lived like a flame amid fierce political winds. She ascended the throne at just 6 days old, inheriting a country of violent men, while loyalty and practical respect were scarce. Her first marriage to a French noble taught her how to charm the court, but returning to Scotland drew her into a chain of tragedies. Darnley, her second husband, was drunken, jealous, and unstable. His affair and death made Mary the central figure in plots and violence. Her subsequent marriage to James Bothwell, who abducted her, outraged Scotland further. Mary became a symbol of boldness, sensuality, and impulsiveness, a queen living by the rhythm of fate, yet refusing to submit to it. Fleeing to England, she was imprisoned by Elizabeth I for 19 years. Yet, even in captivity, Mary retained her charm, intellect, and strategic planning, turning confinement into a sophisticated survival strategy. Ultimately, when executed, she wore a vivid red gown, the color of martyrdom, as a challenge to fate, transforming death into a spectacular, memorable tragedy and a symbol of female power. While Mary represented eruption, Elizabeth I embodied cold calculation, throneless power, and superior intellect. Inheriting a fractured nation divided by her father's chaotic marriages, Elizabeth endured a tragic childhood, witnessing her mother's execution, losing her stepmother, and facing imprisonment herself. Yet these experiences forged her into the Virgin Queen, ruling through intellect, strategy, and absolute self-control. She knew how to wield intelligence, patience, and occasionally restraint to manipulate the court, maintain power, and ensure survival. In Elizabeth, we see the culmination of all survival lessons from previous Tudor women: Margaret's endurance, Frances' intelligence and finesse, Lettuce's patience and strategy, and Mary's explosive force. She not only survived the bloody Tudor drama, but became its central figure, steering the nation's fate with reasoning, calculation, and subtlety, without needing a throne or title to assert her authority. Looking back, this analysis shows that the Tudor dynasty was not just a stage for swords and thrones, but a chessboard of female power, where intelligence, pride, cunning, and a touch of luck could overcome any adversity. These women, facing imprisonment, scandal, forbidden love, and intrigue, still found ways to survive, leaving an indelible mark on history. They were not merely queens or powerful lovers. They were symbols of intellect, subtle power, and the ability to endure amidst violence, hatred, and ruthless political plots. Timeless lessons for anyone interested in power, strategy, or survival. Under the summer sun, Pompeii remained peaceful, with the clatter of iron-rimmed wheels echoing along the streets, the aroma of freshly baked bread mingling with the scent of olive oil and perfumes. The citizens busied themselves preparing for a day of work and leisure, while Mount Vesuvius loomed in the distance, its slopes green with vineyards radiating life and prosperity. No one in the city felt alarmed. For the Romans, a volcano symbolized fertility, not destruction. Children played along the shores of Herculaneum, fishermen mended their nets, housewives simmered lentils and salted anchovies, all blending seamlessly into the rhythm of daily life. Artists painted frescoes on walls, depicting gods, lovers, and immortal myths, while sweaty gladiators trained for evening contests. Even the brothels were open from noon, everything normal as any other day. But within this normalcy, Vesuvius quietly prepared for an unprecedented fury. Around midday, mild tremors began, just enough to catch people's attention but not enough to raise alarm. Birds scattered, dogs barked and whimpered, yet the villagers mostly remained calm. Until the first smoke rose from the mountain, curling like a strange omen. The citizens assumed it was a small fire or a signal from shepherds, unaware this was only the beginning of an apocalyptic day. Life continued at first. Some joked with each other about the tiny dust particles falling like snow, no one truly concerned. But then the smoke column thickened, spreading and darkening the sky. Ash began to fall, covering rooftops, streets, and people. The gray particles grew dense enough to suffocate. The sun disappeared behind a gray-black veil, turning day into night. Roofs cracked under the weight of pumice and ash. Eruptions roared repeatedly, as if the earth itself was growling. In the chaos, human reactions varied astonishingly. Some tried to flee, dragging family, servants, and treasures along, but the streets quickly became buried under thick ash. Carriages overturned, horses collapsed in panic, no escape remained. Those who stayed hid in their homes, seeking shelter under flickering oil lamps, but the hissing of falling ash, thunderous rumbles, and the screams of humans and animals merged into a horrifying symphony. Vesuvius spewed not only smoke and ash, but also molten rocks and toxic gases. Pungent sulfur filled the streets, stinging eyes and choking throats. Some turned to temples, praying to Jupiter and Vulcan, desperately seeking salvation or at least a meaningful sign. But the gods did not intervene. The fury lasted continuously for 18 hours, smoke columns reaching 32 kilometers high, scattering ash and pumice throughout the region, turning Pompeii and Herculaneum into scenes of slow, inescapable destruction. Meanwhile, people maintained their daily routines in madness. A few stood in the streets, pointing in astonishment, others rushed home to gather valuables. Yet none could resist nature's power. Statues, roofs, and streets were buried, suffocated under hot ash and debris, rendering human plans and ambitions meaningless. Screams, the whimpers of pets, and the roar of the volcano became a terrible rhythm, a tragic chorus that history would remember. The story of Pompeii is not merely a natural tragedy. It is also a testament to the fragility of human power and planning before uncontrollable forces. Like Elizabeth I, who knew how to wield restraint, intellect, and strategy to steer the fate of her country, the citizens of Pompeii could not use cunning or authority to avert disaster. They were placed in circumstances where survival depended entirely on luck and quick reflexes, and in just a few hours, a city once vibrant, colorful, and fragrant vanished, frozen in ash like a final immortal moment. Pompeii became a testament to a timeless lesson. No matter the power, intellect, or strategy one possesses, nature is the ultimate force. The dance between humans and fate may deceive temporarily, but it can never win. And just as Elizabeth I turned patience, calculation, and female power into survival weapons within a harsh court, Pompeii reminds us that everything we build, every life, every ambition, can be abruptly frozen before the wrath of nature, a force both terrifying and sacred, eternal yet powerless before the smallness of human existence. Through this perspective, we realize that true human strength lies not in thrones or temporary power, but in the ability to adapt, survive, and maintain dignity even in disaster. Pompeii, with its ash, fire, and everlasting horror, became an immortal tragedy, a vivid historical lesson, like Elizabeth I amid a world of violent men. Those who endure and persevere leave an indelible mark, with or without a throne or kingdom. Under the suffocating layer of ash and the gray sky, Pompeii and Herculaneum appeared like a world gasping for breath, where every human effort became meaningless before the destructive power of Vesuvius. In Herculaneum, the sea breeze temporarily spared them from the rain of ash, but the ground shook violently. Walls cracked and the sea withdrew as if pulled by an invisible hand. Panicked fishermen ran toward the shore, only to witness molten rocks and massive thermal waves surge in, wiping out all hope of survival in seconds. Back in Pompeii, darkness thickened, covering the streets where mothers clutched their children, fathers searched for missing loved ones, and animals were trapped in stables. Those who sought refuge in temples or dug trenches to escape did not realize they were sealing their own tombs. Ash covered rooftops, streets, corpses, and dreams. Their world shrank to only a few feet of visibility, and Pompeii began to vanish under the mountain they once revered as a god. Night fell without warning, darker than any night before, as the volcanic column atop Vesuvius collapsed under its own weight. Pumice stones, burning fragments, and molten debris rained down upon the city, echoing like thousands of hammer blows. Roofs collapsed, archways shattered. Proud marble temples, once symbols of power and prosperity, now cracked and crumbled. Citizens ran chaotically through darkness and ash, torches in hand proving futile. Some placed pillows over their heads, others hid under tables or in basements, but nothing could resist nature's power. Lightning trapped in the red-hot ash flickered, casting light as a warning of impending extinction. The gods seemed completely silent. Only the mountain roared, furious, endless. Streets turned into rivers of molten pumice. Slaves tried to save their masters' carriages, but wheels jammed in the piled rubble. Families screamed, dragging each other over cracked walls. A man pulled his elderly father, both coughing up blood from sulfur, while another wrapped cloth around his child's face, praying, but the prayers were drowned by the volcano's roar. Massive rocks appeared, heavy and enormous, falling with the force of catapults. Anyone outside was crushed, the scent of burning wood, oil, and human flesh filling the air. In the arena, once filled with cheering crowds, only silence remained, ash falling like shrouds over marble seats. Herculaneum was no luckier. The sea receded, exposing the seabed. Dead fish scattered, then a wall of steam and fire surged from the horizon. The first thermal wave struck, engulfing everyone on the shore. Those lucky enough to take refuge in boats only had time to cling to one another before the heat turned them to ash in an instant. The next tsunami swept down the mountainside, scorching vineyards, olive groves, villas, and finally tearing through Pompeii, roofs flying, walls crumbling, bodies scattered everywhere. No escape remained. Even the air became a weapon, thick, boiling, incinerating all remaining life. Families clung to each other, chained dogs by their side, all frozen in a moment of horror, immortal in ash. Vesuvius continued to roar, sending another wave to wipe out all that remained. The once bustling city, full of laughter and commerce, now lay as a gray wasteland, collapsed roofs, twisted shapes, and streets buried under stone, ash, and toxic gases. The gods Jupiter, Venus, Apollo seemed entirely absent. The world above forgot the victims' names, but the mountain remembered, recording the final moments of life in a 9-meter thick tomb of ash. In the following weeks, nature began to quietly revive. Grass sprouted from cracks in the ash, birds returned, memories of the eruption faded into legend. But Pompeii and Herculaneum were buried, becoming immortal tombs of history. Humanity continued, empires endured, yet the once glorious cities slept beneath the ash, waiting millennia to tell their story. In the tragedy of Pompeii, one can see the absolute power of nature and the fragility of humans before it. Like Elizabeth I, who used intellect, strategy, and restraint to survive in a world full of political intrigue, the citizens of Pompeii faced Vesuvius with faith, courage, and desperate attempts to protect family and property. Yet before an uncontrollable fury, all power and strategy became meaningless. What remained was history frozen in ash, a vivid testament to human endurance and limitation. Pompeii, as a historical treasure, preserves memories of life, joy, pain, pride, and tragedy under the hand of nature. Dust-covered statues, ruined villas, streets buried under ash, all serve as a timeless reminder. Human strength can only exist alongside humility and understanding of what cannot be controlled. And from this destruction, the story of Pompeii lives on, immortal like the volcanic ash itself, ready to be told to anyone daring enough to listen. Beneath the still smoldering layer of Vesuvius ash, the streets, villas, and arenas of Pompeii, seemingly asleep for nearly 2 millennia, still tell the story of life and death through their motionless forms. The plaster casts depicting a mother clutching her child, a man shielding his face, a couple in their final moment, are not only evidence of the catastrophe of 79 AD, but also a powerful reminder of human fragility and despair in the face of nature. The Romans, with all their pride, luxury, and intellect, could not withstand the volcano's terrifying fury, and Pompeii became an immortal graveyard where time and ash froze life in a moment of mortal peril. When Pompeii was forgotten beneath the ash and its name vanished from maps during the Middle Ages, the mountain still stood as a silent witness. Farmers, travelers, and families living near its slopes only saw fertile land, olive groves, unaware that beneath them, hundreds of streets, villas, and theaters lay dormant in the shadow of history. Human curiosity would only triumph over superstition many centuries later. In 1599, a canal worker discovered frescoed walls, bones, and strange inscriptions, but the horror drove them away. It was not until 1748, under the reign of Charles III of Bourbon, that Pompeii was systematically excavated, taking the world on a journey that was both marvelous and chilling. What was uncovered astonished the world. Entire villas emerged, frescoes and mosaics still vibrant, statues standing proudly in courtyards as if they had never left life. Bread remained in ovens, blackened but intact in shape, dogs still chained to doorposts, and hundreds of bodies appeared in lifelike poses. Archaeologists poured plaster into voids left by decomposed corpses, recreating the human form at their final moment. The mother clutching her child, like the man covering his mouth, the lovers embracing for the last time, all captured the tragedy, beauty, and fragility of humanity in the face of death. Pompeii was reborn, not as a city of the living, but as a ghost revived in stone, ash, and plaster. Frescoes depicted daily life, from lavish banquets to ordinary routines. Streets once bustling with footsteps and street cries still echoed faintly through the ash. Roman graffiti, from words of love to insults, remained clear, proving that humans, even after death, left traces of their lives. One inscription read, "Gas Pomedius Dephilus was here," etched into plaster nearly 2 millennia ago, while another humorously stated, "If anyone sits here, read before you die, drink, be merry." Humor, humanity, and everyday life were resurrected in the thick layers of ash. Yet Pompeii did not offer only fascination. Direct contact with plaster casts frozen in the moment of death made visitors vividly feel the horror that occurred. Mothers, slaves, children, lovers, all motionless, their faces revealing fear, despair, and final courage. Every step through the city was a touch of tragedy, an encounter with life's fragility. Museums displaying artifacts, jewelry, charred loaves of bread, all demonstrated that ordinary life could be abruptly cut short, yet leave an immortal mark. For writers, artists, and scholars, Pompeii became an endless source of inspiration. Dickens, Twain, Gertrude, and many others walked through streets stiff with ash, sensing the horror, beauty, and intimacy. They saw a civilization once mighty, possessing everything, now vanished in a single day, and from this drew lessons of impermanence, the power of nature, and human limits. Artists transformed Pompeii into romantic tragedy. Scientists studied it as a geological wonder, but none could erase the unsettling awareness that what happened could occur again. Vesuvius, under the false tranquility of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, still retained its strange allure. Green slopes, vineyards, and quiet villages hid the deadly treasure beneath. Residents lived, children played, farmers plowed on the old ash, unaware that history lay beneath their feet, ready to remind them of a fury that could strike at any moment. Volcanologists monitored every tremor, every whisper of the mountain, mapping evacuation routes. But even experts admitted if Vesuvius erupted again, chaos would be inevitable, and today's population far exceeds that of Roman times. Meanwhile, historical pilgrims still climbed the slopes, gazing at the plains where Pompeii and Herculaneum had vanished. From above, they could trace the streets, arenas, and walls, the fossilized heartbeat of Rome's golden age. The stillness here was almost reverential, reminding everyone that although the city vanished, its story resonates more powerfully than ever. Pompeii is not merely an archaeological site, it is a reflective mirror. Civilization, however mighty, exists only temporarily, and beauty, art, or order can vanish in an instant. Today, Vesuvius still sleeps, its breath hidden beneath centuries of calm, but its latent power remains. The mountain's silhouette stretches across time, reminding humanity that beneath every peaceful moment lies an invisible fire, ready to erupt, eternal and unpredictable. From Scorpus, a boy slave trained in the Maximus arena as a charioteer, to modern farmers and tourists, the story of Pompeii continues, a vivid symbol of human intelligence, fragility, and immortality in the face of nature and time. Under the blazing sun of the Circus Maximus, where the sound of hooves, trumpets, and the cheers of hundreds of thousands of people blended into one, Scorpus was not just a charioteer. He was the embodiment of speed, precision, and courage amid a storm of chaos. From his early days struggling in the stables of the Green faction, where he sifted through manure, groomed horses, and observed veteran racers, Scorpus nurtured a unique talent: the ability to read a horse's breath, anticipate an opponent's moves, and handle the reins like an artist wielding a brush, painting miraculous curves on the sandy track. No one paid attention to him on his first appearance, a nameless slave in the legends of chariot racing enthusiasts. But The moment the gates opened, Scorpus proved that fame and fear could be built in mere minutes. He navigated tight turns so closely that even experienced racers flinched. Dust flew thickly, wheels screeched, and by the finish of the lap, the name Scorpus resounded across the tongues of the crowd. The Circus Maximus was the heart of Rome, where every race was not merely a game, but a religion, where hundreds of thousands participated in cheering, praying, and betting. The factions, green, blue, red, and white, controlled city life, turning each race into a life and death battle. Supporters did not just wear their colors, they were ready to fight, destroy stables, and bribe officials to ensure victory. In that world, Scorpus was the weapon of the Greens, the living hope, and also the target of all hatred, envy, and schemes. Every lap was a dance with death. The turns, known as the metae, were the deadliest killers on the track. Too wide, and you lost time. Too narrow, and you could slip, fall, and drag the whole team into chaos, blood, and pain. Scorpus mastered the turns with rare skill, like giving the impression that he glided past death without fear. In the final laps, when Musclosus, the seasoned and ruthless racer of the Greens, tried to cut him off, the entire Circus Maximus held its breath with every movement. A mere flick of the hand, a moment of perfect balance, and Scorpus clung to the post so closely that the crowd gasped in astonishment while the rival chariot shattered against the barriers. He surged toward the finish, dirt and blood smeared on his face, cloak flying in the wind, and the stands erupted, coins and wreaths raining down. The emperor rose and applauded. Rome had found its hero. But victory did not bring safety. With every lap, pressure weighed heavily on Scorpus. Every enemy, every opponent, every horse, and every moment on the track could mean the end. He witnessed friends crushed under hooves, chariots hurled into the air, horrifying falls that made the fans scream in despair. Under the eyes of hundreds of thousands, life and death intertwined, creating a rhythm of drama only understood by charioteers. Scorpus did not race merely to win. He raced to survive, to assert himself in the harshest world. His world was divided not only by factions but by its own cruelty. Citizens, from slaves to senators, merged into the frenzy of racing, and the streets of Rome outside the circus were no less chaotic. The Greens and Blues, two giants of passion, were ready to spill into taverns, destroy stables, and bribe officials to turn the tide. Loyalists of the Reds and Whites were equally fervent, willing to do anything to protect the honor and survival of their racer. In this world, Scorpus was a living symbol, but also a constant target of hatred, plots, and assassination. His victories were the pride of the Greens, equating to power, wealth, adoration, and even immortality in the eyes of fans. Children carved his name on walls, street vendors made clay figurines, every tavern spoke of him, and every bathhouse debate revolved around him. Scorpus became Rome's first true celebrity athlete, a real star surpassing any slave or citizen before him. But fame came with tremendous pressure. Every race was a gamble with death, and every failure could mean the end. Scorpus faced the risk of destruction daily. Rein ropes tied around waists, hooks dragging the injured, and chariots that could break at any moment. All realities he had witnessed too many times. He understood that, despite honor, every step on the track was a balance between life and death. Yet it was precisely this understanding, along with courage and extraordinary skill, that made him a legend. People saw him not merely as a racer, but as the embodiment of hope, absolute precision, and unwavering bravery, a symbol untouchable amid the frenzied crowd and relentless dangers. In his 20s, Scorpus had become untouchable, the fastest man in Rome, the face of speed, faith, and the Greens' devotion. He was depicted on amulets, cups, and small statues, a symbol of a world where life, death, and glory intertwined with every lap, where the gods of speed and death watched every flick of the reins. Every race was not only a challenge to oneself, but also a testament to human willpower, intellect, and extraordinary courage, the qualities that had transformed Scorpus from a slave boy into an immortal legend in the heart of Rome. Under the gray winter sky, the Circus Maximus was no longer vibrant with the colors of the crowd or the dazzling sunlight. Thick, icy dust seeped through Scorpus' cloak, reminding him that every victory, every cheer, had to be paid for with sweat, blood, and extreme tension. He climbed onto his chariot, gripping the reins tightly, and looked at his 4 horses, Celer, Swift, Volucer, Flying One, Catinus, and Sparsus. They stood still, breath steaming in the cold air, eyes glimmering as if reading the thoughts of their master. No longer mere tools or means to achieve fame, these horses were allies, the only creatures who understood his obsession, and he understood them only in his own way. Every morning, before dawn, he spoke with them, stroked their manes, checked every strap, learning the rhythm of their breathing and the mood of each. This bond was not ordinary affection. It was a life and death connection, where a single lapse, a moment of panic, could end everything. For Scorpus, fame and victory were no longer rewards. They were duties, the relentless demands of Rome. The people, merchants, children carving his name on walls, wealthy sponsors, all wanted him to win always. But victory no longer meant gold or ordinary adoration. It was proof that a slave who had once been crushed could stand atop the empire, that he could become someone Rome could not ignore. Rumors began to spread, horses bewitched, priests bribed, strength-enhancing potions. In truth, Scorpus was simply obsessed with winning, with proving himself in a world where failure meant death or oblivion. The crowd cheered his name as if he were a god, and every gaze upon him was a test of will and reflex. The chariot swayed on the turns, the dangerous mete turns, where the slightest mistake could destroy everything. Seller and Swift, the lead horses, reacted to every flick of Scorpus' wrist, to every shout amid the chaos of countless hooves around them. Flying one, Cottinus and Sparsus maintained the rhythm for the whole team, ensuring that speed did not break them apart. Scorpus, in each moment, was both rider and conductor, guiding the four horses like delicate instruments, creating a living storm of muscle, dust, and will. But every glorious moment carried danger. A cracked wheel, a stumble, a panicked horse. If any of these occurred, the fastest man in Rome could become the next victim. Scorpus knew this well. He had witnessed hundreds of charioteers fall, dragged from the track by hooks, hands scarred, knees shattered, backs aching, lungs burning from dust, eyes squinting against the blinding light and road dust. His 20s passed with an accelerated aging, for this profession showed no mercy. Few lived past 30, yet he still raced, still stood at the top, for there was no choice but to win. Scorpus's fame was sharp as a sword. He was depicted on oil lamps, mosaics, cups, graffiti praising him covered taverns, sponsors threw money at him, noble women whispered his name behind silk fans. He was both a star and a reminder of the fragility of Rome's social hierarchy. Once a slave, now wealthier than nobles, worshipped and feared simultaneously. Yet Scorpus remained humble at heart, devoted entirely to the track, to every turn, every stride of his horses, every tactic against opponents. He said, "The crowd does not cheer for rest," for he understood that Rome's love always came with demand, and fame would betray anyone who faltered. As the chariot surged forward, all politics, pressure, danger, and expectation vanished. Only the sound of hooves, the wind, and dust flying thick remained. Scorpus and his horses became a single entity, flying over the sandy track, seizing every moment between life and death. And in those moments, he felt his heartbeat in sync with the horse's breath, soaring on the edge of death, a sensation only understood by those who had tasted mortality. Yet Scorpus knew the fleeting nature of fame. Rome loved him, but it would also drive him to death if it produced enough excitement. A cracked wheel, the sudden death of a favorite horse, haunting dreams, all were omens for the next races. Friends advised him to rest, but he smiled, waved to them, and joked, "The race ends when the sand drinks the blood." He was not afraid. He knew that life, fame, and danger always walked together. It was a cold winter morning in 95 CE when Scorpus climbed into the chariot for his final race. The sky was gray, the light dulling the shine of his armor, the dust resembling ashes. The crowd barely paid attention, but Scorpus knew that the moment itself was most important. He rode as he had all his life, combining grace, strength, and steel resolve. He knew the next victory could be his last, but in every second on the track he remained the embodiment of Rome, wild, glorious, and blazing brightly before vanishing into the dust. Under the hazy dawn, the gymnasium of ancient Greece was no longer merely a place to train the body. It was a space where the physical form became a sacred symbol of will and spirit. Young men from various city-states came here carrying the desire to surpass themselves, the aspiration to become living embodiments of arete, the perfection that the Greeks regarded as humanity's highest calling. They shed all markers of status, cloaks, sandals, even pride, leaving only the naked body exposed before the gods, the gentle morning light, and the eyes of teammates, trainers, and sometimes passing strangers. No nobles, no slaves remained, only muscles, senses, synchronized breaths, and a spirit aimed toward perfection. The rhythmic clanging of weights, the murmur of throws and twists, the raspy scraping of strigils against skin, all combined into a living symphony, each beat infused with reverence for the gods. Trainers of the Pedo tribe stood in the hallways, arms raised to the sky, reciting solemn prayers, inviting Zeus, Hermes, Heracles, and Athena to be present in every breath and movement. A few drops of olive oil, a sprig of laurel, or a small cup of wine were placed on the altar, symbols of connection between the mortal and the eternal. Olive oil did more than soften the skin and protect muscles from injury. It carried sacred meaning, symbolizing vitality, purity, and divine energy. Men stood side by side, skin glistening in the morning sunlight, hands gently rubbing oil over each muscle, breathing deeply, concentrating their entire will on each movement. Every motion had purpose, contracting muscles, stretching, bending the spine, raising heart rate, and regulating breath. There was no display of showmanship. All focus was on the harmony of body, spirit, and devotion. As the strigil swept across the skin, the raspy sound created a rhythm for the athletes, reminding them that every drop of sweat, every motion was a prayer, a worship actualized through movement. The residue of oil and sweat, sometimes preserved as healing charms, symbolized the sacred energy just generated by the body. In that moment, every muscle became a symbol of refinement, every vein a path toward divine strength. Before the official training began, the athletes performed basic exercises, running around the grounds, lifting heavy objects, throwing discs, wrestling. Yet even in these movements, the spirit of prayer and reverence remained. Every step, every throw, every twist was a petition to the gods. Grant strength, grant speed, grant endurance and wisdom to overcome challenges. The Greeks believed the human form reflected the gods, and training the body was not only a physical need, but a sacred means to align with the perfection of the universe. Greek youths, under the morning light, trained with extreme discipline and focus. They understood that every drop of sweat, every heartbeat, every muscle tension carried deep significance, a manifestation of dedication, discipline, courage, and mastery. They trained not only to win athletic competitions, but also to affirm themselves before both themselves and the gods. In every lunge, every lift, every throw, they felt energy from the earth, the air, the light, and from one another, creating a silent connection between humans and between humanity and the cosmos. Under the guidance of their trainers, the young athletes gradually reached the state the Greeks called the perfect balance between body and spirit. Every leap, every toss, every sprint was performed with harmony, graceful yet powerful, rhythmic yet intense. Olive oil, strigils, and prayer rituals transformed them from ordinary youths into living embodiments of the gods, expressing strength, intellect, and the spirit pushing toward ultimate limits. The gymnasium became sacred, where sweating was a form of prayer and the mortal body touched the divine. In the gentle morning light, with a lingering mist hovering over the training grounds, the Greek athletes stood ready for the main challenges: long distance running, discus throwing, wrestling, and tactical exercises. They understood that as Scorpus had experienced on the Maximus track, greatness was measured not only by victory or fame, but by the ability to master fear, connect with teammates and nature, and turn every movement into devotion. Each athlete was a living flame, burning brightly in the moment, yet aware that life and greatness were both finite. And in that moment, as toned muscles gleamed in the morning light, as sweat and olive oil mingled on the skin, the gymnasium was no longer just a place to train the body, but a birthplace of legends, where Greek youths learned that perfection, honor, and immortality lay in the subtle union of body, spirit, and reverence. Every exercise, every motion served as a reminder that greatness is not eternal, but living fully in accordance with ideals, with the divine, is something any human can attain. Under the morning sunlight, the Greek gymnasium became more alive than ever, not with noise or chaos, but through the subtle fusion of body, spirit, and the divine. As the athletes concluded the oiling rituals and dusting, they entered an almost supernatural state where every movement carried sacred meaning. The olive oil on their skin was no longer merely a physical substance, but a symbol of purity and divine blessing, while the fine dust, crystallized from sweat, footprints, and time, reminded them of the body's mortality, of its earthly origin tied to Mother Gaia. The combination of oil and dust, light and shadow, strength and mortality created a balance the Greeks called erit, the ultimate harmony of body, mind, and virtue. Trainers of the Paedo tribe walked among the athletes, observing every motion, every step, every twist, ensuring that each athlete achieved optimal balance. Not too slippery, not too dry, not too dusty, not too oily. Everything was under control, reflecting the Greek philosophy of moderation. A single misstep in preparation was a misstep in life. It could cost victory or injure the body, and more importantly, it could break the sacred connection with the gods. In the gym, every movement was a lesson in discipline, focus, and deep reverence for the divine. When the rituals ended, the athletes stood before the arena, their bodies glistening in the light, preparing for the official challenges. They bowed their heads, breathed deeply, and visualized the path of the discus, the flight of the javelin, or wrestling stances. Before each contest, hands were raised, prayers were spoken, petitions from the depths of the soul requesting strength without arrogance, courage without chaos, and victories worthy of the gods. Every athlete knew that victory did not belong to them alone, but was a gift granted by the gods. No one dared enter the arena without performing the ritual. It was almost sacrilegious, a dangerous act of hubris that could bring disaster. In the silent space, the first movements of the competition began like a symphony, where the murmurs of bodies, the scraping of strigiles, the rumble of wrestling, and the pounding of feet merged into one rhythm. Each sport was an expression of virtue. Wrestling taught patience and skill, running built endurance and focus, discus and javelin developed agility, precision, and strategy. Body and mind combined perfectly. Victory was not only about physical ability, but also intelligence, mastery, and self-awareness. The philosopher Epictetus emphasized that true freedom comes only when a person masters themselves. The gymnasium was the place to learn this self-mastery through the most practical lessons. The pedo trainers acted as teachers, priests, and sculptors, both moving among the athletes to instruct, correct, and adjust posture and breathing. Beside them, oilers and masseurs cared for each limb, helping muscles recover, soothing bruises and cramps, and transmitting sacred energy through herbal oils. Every movement was intimate yet full of responsibility, rhythmic yet reverent, transforming the gym into a living temple, where the mortal body became a moving image of perfection and divinity. Before each throw, the athletes stood still, breathed deeply, visualized the object's path, and focused all will and spirit. Before wrestling, they studied their opponent, analyzing every move, not to dominate brutally, but to understand and surpass in thought and strategy. Mind and body became one. The goal was not only victory, but balance, self-awareness, and the ability to control oneself to the highest degree. Rhythm, grace, strength, and self-mastery created a sacred dance, a prayer in motion, reminding all of the connection between humans and the universe. Spectators did not come only to witness the competitions, but to contemplate the sacred order present in the perfect movements of the body. Observing strong muscles, precise throws, and rhythmic steps, they recognized the balance between strength and intellect, mortal and divine. Plato once said that beholding a perfectly trained body was like reading a philosophy in motion. The mastery of the body became a means to understand the philosophy of life, to perceive the beauty and order of the cosmos. By midday, as sunlight fell directly on the training floor, every muscle glistened with oil and dust. Every drop of sweat reflected light like jewels. The athletes stood in rows, breathing deeply and turning their thoughts to the gods. They knew that the gym was not only a place to prepare for contests, but also a place to train the spirit, cultivate patience, courage, self-control, and connection with the universe. Every moment, from the oiling and dusting rituals to the running, throwing, or wrestling, was an expression of worship and dedication, transforming the mortal into the divine, sweat into prayer, and the body into a living symbol of Greek will and spirit. Under the golden-hued sunset, the Greek gymnasium became quiet, yet still brimming with life, as if the space had just witnessed a ritual and was simultaneously preparing for a new spiritual journey. As the athletes left the lutron, where body and spirit were purified, They carried with them a wondrous sense of unity, the body trained, the soul cleansed, and the spirit ready to enter the world with humility and courage. They were no longer isolated individuals, but part of an eternal order where humans and divinity harmonized through every breath, every throw, every stride, and every match. What was remarkable about this gymnasium was the spiritual and social cohesion expressed in the smallest details. Here, differences in status, age, or origin were erased. Farmers, soldiers, poets, and nobles stood side by side, removing all barriers, united by sweat and reverence for the gods. They learned to listen, to respect, and to understand not only their opponents, but also themselves. In the silence between the splashes of water on shoulders, the scraping of metal against dust, and deep breaths, they realized that every muscle, every step, every javelin throw or discus cast was a lesson in patience, discipline, and harmony with the cosmos. After training sessions, the purification in the lutron extended beyond cleansing the body. It became a ritual of rebirth. Drops of oil and flowing water washed away all traces of envy, anger, or arrogance that had arisen during practice or competition. This was the moment athletes learned to shed their ego, allowing all intense passions, from the exhilaration of victory to the pain of defeat, to become life lessons. Water flowing over the body erased all distinctions, reminding them that in the eyes of Zeus, every effort was valuable and every action had to be balanced by humility. The victorious were not permitted arrogance, the defeated were not scorned. Both were living offerings to the gods, reminding that life, strength, and spirit were intertwined with the universe. Yet physical and spiritual purification was not solely an individual matter. In the bathhouse, athletes shared stories, exchanged knowledge, and sometimes formed strategic alliances or lasting friendships. These moments created a special kind of brotherhood, where trust, honor, and loyalty were tested and strengthened. The Greeks believed that betraying a teammate in the gym was not just a personal wrongdoing, but an affront to the community and the gods. It was honesty in practice and competition that created the true value of strength, not merely to dominate on the battlefield or in the arena, but to serve the community, elevate oneself, and attain the perfection of human ideals. Each afternoon, as the light softened and shadows stretched across marble walls, athletes gathered beneath the columns to eat, discuss philosophy, and reflect on the day's lessons. Stories of courage, sacrifice, strategy, and philosophy were passed from the elders to the younger generation, not only through words, but also through conduct and training. The gymnasium became a living school where intellect and physicality coexisted, where lessons in humility, honesty, and dignity were cultivated through every movement. Socrates, Plato, and other philosophers frequented this space, recognizing that knowledge of philosophy and knowledge of the body were inseparable. It was this unity that created beauty, balance, and sanctity in humanity. With each contest at major festivals, from the Olympics to the Pythian, Isthmian, or Nemean Games, the gymnasium acted as a forge where muscles, spirit, and thought were owned to perfection. Athletes left the gym and entered the arena with polished bodies, filled with sacred energy, their bare feet touching the earth as a reminder that they were children of Gaia, yet also favored by the gods. Before stepping into competition, they swore oaths at the altar of Zeus, pledging to follow the rules, compete fairly, and respect their opponents. Every javelin throw, discus toss, or wrestling match began with a silent prayer. Hermes, Apollo, Nike, or Zeus called to in the mind, and in that moment, the athlete became a living bridge between the mortal and the divine. The competitions were not merely contests of physical ability, but spiritual festivals. The cheers of the crowd, the drum beats, flutes, and even silent applause formed a collective hymn, praising human qualities, courage, and perseverance. Victory was rewarded not with gold or silver, but with laurel wreaths or olives, symbols of power and divine favor. The winner's name was carved in stone, praised in poetry, and painted on vases, becoming a living symbol of excellence toward which all aspired. The victor did not boast arrogantly, the vanquished did not fall. All returned to the lutron, cleansing body and soul, prepared for the next day with serenity and discipline. In the flickering light of evening, the gym returned to silence, with only the sound of water, the scent of olive oil, and the faint aroma of laurel in the air. Athletes sat beneath the columns, sharing meals, discussing philosophy, and reflecting on the day's lessons. They understood that strength without humility was meaningless. Discipline without honesty was worthless. Through the rituals of training, competition, and purification, the Greeks demonstrated that even mortal humans could touch the eternal, and that perfection, though finite, still reflected a part of Olympus here on Earth.